The warning lights turned red across every panel in the cockpit. Kang Dae-ho gripped the controls as his ship shook like a leaf in a storm. Something had gone wrong with the jump drive. Very wrong. The experimental engine that was supposed to bend space itself now tore it apart instead. No, 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 Dae-ho muttered, his fingers flying across the emergency systems. Nothing responded the way it should. The backup power flickered and died. Then the main power started dropping fast. Through the window he saw normal space snap back into view. But this was not where he was supposed to be. No stars he recognized, no navigation markers, no friendly signals from human colonies. Just an empty sector of space with a single green and blue planet hanging in the void. The ship lurched hard to the right. Dae-ho felt the artificial gravity fail. His stomach flipped as he floated up from his seat. Only the safety harness kept him in place. The planet below was getting bigger. Much bigger. He was caught in its gravity well and his engines were completely dead. Come on, he whispered, trying to restart anything that would slow his fall. The atmospheric entry systems responded with a weak whine. Better than nothing. Maybe he would not burn up completely. Maybe. The ship hit the upper atmosphere at an angle. Fire erupted around the hull. The heat shields were doing their job, but barely. Dae-ho could feel the temperature rising in the cockpit even through all the insulation. Sweat ran down his face. His hands stayed steady on the controls even though they were nearly useless now. He was a pilot. He had trained for this. The military had put him through every disaster scenario they could imagine. But those were simulations. This was real. The ground was rushing up at him at hundreds of miles per hour. Dae-ho pulled hard on the stick, trying to flatten his descent angle. The ship groaned and shuddered, but obeyed a little. He saw thick jungle below, tall trees packed together like grass, mountains in the distance, rivers cutting through the green. It might have been beautiful if he was not about to crash into it. The first treetops brushed the belly of his ship, then more, then thousands of them. The ship tore through the canopy like a bullet through paper. Branches exploded around him. The cockpit window cracked in 3 places but held. Barely. Then the real impact came. The ship hit solid ground and bounced once, twice. Everything not bolted down became a projectile. Dae-ho's head snapped forward and back. His vision blurred. The sound was incredible, like the universe was tearing itself apart around him. The ship slid for what felt like miles, ripping through vegetation and earth. Finally, it came to rest at an angle, nose down in what might have been a ravine. Silence fell. Or maybe Dae-ho's ears were just ringing too loud to hear anything else. He sat there for a long moment, checking to see if he was dead. He did not think dead people could feel this much pain. His left shoulder hurt badly. His head was pounding, but he could move his fingers and toes. That was good. That was very good. Status report, he said to the ship's computer. Nothing, the entire system was dead. Not even emergency power. He tried the distress beacon. Dead. The radio. Dead. The navigation system. Dead. Dae-ho unbuckled his safety harness and fell forward against the tilted cockpit. He caught himself with his good arm. Moving carefully, he made his way to the emergency locker. It took 3 tries to get it open with the door jammed in the crash. Inside, he found a survival knife, a water filtration unit, a week's worth of ration bars, and a basic first aid kit. No weapons. No communication gear that was not part of the main ship systems. He patched up his shoulder as best he could. The pain was sharp but manageable. Nothing seemed broken. Just bruised badly. He would have worse bruises by tomorrow, if he lived that long. Getting out of the ship took another 10 minutes. The main hatch was completely jammed. He had to climb through a crack in the cockpit window, squeezing through broken metal and trying not to cut himself too badly. When he finally dropped to the ground outside, his legs nearly gave out. The jungle around him was like nothing on Earth. The trees were tall, maybe 200 feet high, with bark that seemed to shimmer purple and green. The leaves were wide and flat, catching the light from the sun. Or suns. Dae-ho looked up and saw 2 stars in the sky. One yellow and bright, one smaller and more orange. A binary system. The air was thick and humid. He could breathe it fine, which was lucky. The oxygen levels must be close to Earth normal. But the smell was strange, sweet and sharp at the same time, like flowers and electricity mixed together. Dae-ho looked back at his ship. It was completely destroyed. The hull was torn open in a dozen places. The engine section was actually on fire, sending up a thin column of black smoke. Nothing was salvageable. He was stuck here unless someone came looking for him, and without a working beacon, nobody would know where to look. Great, he said to the empty jungle. Just great. He checked his supplies one more time. A week of food. The knife. The water filter. The first aid kit. His augmented reflexes from military training. And his brain. That was all he had. The smoke from his ship would draw attention. Maybe good attention, maybe bad. He needed to move away from the crash site. Find water, find shelter, find out if this planet had intelligent life, and if it did, hope they were friendly. Deho picked a direction that looked less dense and started walking. The jungle was thick but not impossible to move through. He used his knife to cut through vines and push aside branches. His shoulder hurt with every movement. His head was still pounding. But he was alive. And as long as he was alive, he had a chance. After an hour of walking, he found something interesting. A path. It was narrow and overgrown, but definitely a path. Something intelligent had made it. Something that walked on the ground and cleared vegetation. Deho stood at the edge of the path and made his decision. He turned right and followed it deeper into the jungle, toward whatever waited at the other end. 2 days of walking had left Deho exhausted, hungry, and desperate. The ration bars were holding out, but barely. He had found water using the filter, which was good, but he had also found signs that made him nervous. Deep claw marks on trees, strange tracks in the mud that were bigger than his whole body, sounds in the night that made him climb into the branches and stay there until morning. The path had grown wider and more defined, whatever made it traveled this way often. Deho moved carefully now, trying to make as little noise as possible. His military training told him to scout before making contact. See what you were dealing with before walking into a situation blind. Then, on the afternoon of the second day, he heard voices. They were not human voices. The sounds were deeper, with clicking and whistling mixed in. But they were definitely voices. Language. Communication. Intelligence. Deho crouched behind a thick tree trunk and moved forward slowly. The voices grew louder. Then he saw smoke rising above the trees. Cooking fires maybe, or forges. Either way, it meant civilization of some kind. He climbed carefully into a tree that gave him a good view. What he saw made him stop breathing for a moment. The village was built into massive trees that made the tall ones he had been walking through look small. These trees were ancient, with trunks as wide as buildings. Wooden platforms had been built between them, connected by rope bridges and stairs carved right into the bark. Houses hung from the branches like fruit. The whole settlement was maybe 50 feet off the ground. But it was the people who made Deho stare. They were not human, not even close. The creatures stood about 6 feet tall, covered in natural armor plating that looked like insect shells but moved like skin. It was dark green and brown, with patterns that probably helped them blend into the jungle. They had 4 arms, 2 on each side of their bodies. The upper arms were thicker and stronger. The lower arms were thinner and more flexible. Their heads were angular with large eyes that glowed amber in the shadows. No visible nose, but a mouth with what looked like mandibles on the sides. There were maybe 30 of them visible. Some were working on weapons, sharpening spears and blades. Others were carrying supplies up and down the trees. A few young ones were playing, chasing each other across the rope bridges with incredible speed and balance. They moved fast, much faster than humans. Deho watched them for an hour, learning what he could. They were organized, disciplined. Everyone had a job and did it without being told. The weapons they carried were not just for show. These were warriors. A warrior culture, maybe, like the Spartans or Mongols back on Earth. He also noticed the decorations around the village. Bones hung from some of the platforms. Skulls of various creatures were mounted on posts. Battle trophies, probably. This was not a peaceful farming community. These were fighters. The question was whether he should make contact or try to slip away. His distress beacon was broken. He needed help to fix it, or at least materials to build something that could signal a human ship. These people might have salvaged technology from other crashes, or they might kill him on sight. Deho was still trying to decide when the decision was made for him. A young one, smaller than the others, suddenly looked up at the tree he was hiding in. The amber eyes locked onto him. For a second, neither of them moved. Then the young one opened its mouth and made a sound like an alarm, a sharp, piercing whistle that carried across the whole village. Every head turned. Every pair of glowing eyes looked toward Deho's tree. Well, that is not good, Deho said quietly. He climbed down quickly but not so fast that he would fall. No point making this worse by breaking his neck. By the time his feet hit the ground, he was surrounded. At least a dozen warriors had moved with incredible speed, forming a circle around him. Each one held a spear, pointing inward at him. Their forearms made them look even more intimidating. 2 arms held the spears. The other 2 were free to grab or strike. Daeho raised his hand slowly, the universal sign of peace. Or at least he hoped it was universal. "Easy," he said in Korean. "I am not here to fight. I need help." The words meant nothing to them. One of the warriors clicked something sharp and aggressive. Another responded with a series of whistles. They were talking about him, probably deciding whether to kill him now or later. An older one pushed through the circle. This one was bigger than the others, with armor that had been scarred and dented from many fights. The amber eyes were darker, almost orange. This was a leader, someone important. The old warrior looked Daeho up and down with all 4 eyes focused on him. It was like being examined by a predator deciding if you were food or threat. Daeho stayed still, hands up, trying to look non-threatening while also not looking weak. It was a hard balance. The old warrior made a gesture with 2 of its arms. The other warriors lowered their spears slightly but did not back away. Then the old one stepped closer to Daeho, so close he could smell the strange scent of its skin. Like earth and metal mixed together, it reached out with one hand and poked Daeho's chest. Hard. Testing his strength, maybe. Or just seeing what he was made of. Then it grabbed his arm and squeezed. Daeho held back a wince. The grip was incredibly strong. The old warrior made a sound that might have been surprise. It was looking at Daeho's arms, specifically at the fact that he only had 2 of them. It held up its own 4 arms and then pointed at Daeho's 2. Then it made a sound that other warriors responded to with what sounded like laughter. They thought he was weak, handicapped, a broken creature with missing limbs. Daeho felt a flash of anger but pushed it down. Getting emotional would not help. He needed to stay calm and figure out what they wanted. The old warrior turned and barked orders at the others. They responded quickly, forming 2 lines. Then 12 warriors stepped forward, each one picking up a spear from a pile near one of the trees. They were not the spears they had been holding before. These were different, ceremonial maybe, decorated with carvings and what looked like dried flowers. The old warrior planted the 12 spears in the ground in front of Daeho, spacing them evenly. Then it stepped back and gestured at the circle of warriors around them. The meaning was clear even without words. This was a test. A challenge. Daeho looked at the spears, then at the warriors holding them, then back at the old leader. He understood now. They were going to throw those spears at him, all 12 at once. And if he survived, maybe they would talk. If he died, well, problem solved for them. "You have got to be kidding me," Daeho muttered. But the warriors were already taking positions around him, each one gripping a spear with 2 hands. Their 4 arms gave them incredible strength and accuracy. He had seen them move. They were fast. Very fast. This was bad. This was very bad. But running would just get him killed, and trying to fight was suicide. The only option was to pass their test. Somehow. Daeho took a deep breath and centered himself. He called up every bit of training from his years in the military. The reflex enhancement program, the combat dodging drills, the 1,000 hours in the simulator learning to read projectile trajectories. All of it. He looked at the old warrior and nodded, ready. The old warrior raised one arm. The entire village had gone silent. Every eye was watching, waiting. Then the arm dropped. The moment before the spears flew felt like an eternity. Daeho's enhanced reflexes kicked in, making everything slow down to a crawl. He could see the muscles in each warrior's forearms tensing, could track the angle of each spear, could calculate the trajectories before they even left their hands. This was what the military had done to him. Genetic tweaks and neural implants that made his reaction time 3 times faster than a normal human. It had made him an excellent pilot. Now it might save his life. The old warrior's arm finished its drop. 12 spears launched as one. Daeho moved. His body twisted to the right as the first spear passed through where his chest had been a fraction of a second before. He dropped to a crouch as 2 more spears crossed above his head. So close he felt the wind from them. His left hand touched the ground for balance as he pivoted, letting another spear pass by his shoulder with inches to spare. Time was still moving slowly for him. He could see everything. The shocked expressions starting to form on the warriors' faces, The way the old leader's eyes widened, the young ones in the trees leaning forward to see better. Another spear came at his legs. Daiho jumped, pulling his knees up to his chest as the weapon passed underneath him. He landed in a roll, coming up on the other side of the circle. 3 more spears adjusted their paths, tracking his movement. Smart. They had not all thrown at the same spot. They had spread the pattern to cover multiple positions, but Daiho had trained against multiple shooters, against computer-controlled opponents that could predict his movements and adjust. These warriors were good, maybe the best on their planet. But they were not computers. He twisted sideways, making himself as thin a target as possible. One spear grazed his sleeve, tearing the fabric but not touching skin. Another passed so close to his face that it cut a single strand of his hair. He could see it falling in slow motion, drifting in the air like a feather. The last 3 spears were the most dangerous. They came from different angles, trying to box him in. One high, one low, one straight at center mass. No room to dodge all 3 normally. But Daiho was not moving normally anymore. He dropped flat to the ground as the high spear passed over him. At the same moment, he kicked out with both legs, launching himself backward in a slide. The center spear missed by a hand's width. The low spear was already past him by the time he moved. Then it was over. 12 spears were embedded in the ground and trees behind him. Daiho was on his back, breathing hard but completely untouched. Not a scratch. Not even a bruise. The silence that followed was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody made a sound. Even the young ones in the trees had stopped playing to watch. Every single warrior was staring at Daiho with what looked like shock and disbelief. Daiho took a moment to catch his breath. His heart was pounding. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, making his hands shake slightly. That had been close. Much closer than he wanted to admit. One spear had literally cut his hair. Another had torn his sleeve. If he had been even a fraction slower, he would be dead right now. But he was not dead. He had passed their test. Now he needed to make an impression. Daiho stood up slowly, brushing dirt from his clothes. He walked over to one of the spears embedded in the ground and pulled it free. The weapon was heavier than he expected, made from some kind of dense wood with a carved bone tip. Good balance. Well made. He turned to face the old warrior who was still staring at him with those dark orange eyes. Daiho could not read the expression, but he hoped it was respect and not anger. Then Daiho smiled. It was important to smile, to show confidence, to prove he was not afraid. "My turn," he said in Korean, knowing they could not understand the words but hoping they would understand the tone. He held the spear for a moment, letting the warriors tense up. A few of them reached for their weapons, thinking he was about to attack. But Daiho had no intention of throwing it. He was not here to fight. He was here to survive, to make allies if possible. Instead of throwing the spear, Daiho planted it firmly in the ground at his feet, the same way the old warrior had planted the 12 ceremonial spears before the test. A mirror of respect, a gesture that said he understood their customs and was willing to follow them. Then he walked forward, straight toward the old warrior. He kept his hands visible and open. No weapons, no threat, just a stranger asking for hospitality. The warriors around him shifted nervously. Several raised their spears again, clicking warnings at him, but the old leader held up one hand, stopping them. It was studying Daiho with intense focus, all 4 eyes tracking his every movement. Daiho stopped 3 feet away from the old warrior. Close enough to talk if they had a shared language. Close enough to fight if it came to that. But close enough to also show trust. He placed his right hand over his heart in what he hoped was a universal gesture. Then he said slowly, "I am Kang Daiho. I come in peace. I need help." The old warrior tilted its head to one side. A very human gesture that made Daiho feel a little better. It reached out with one of its lower arms and touched Daiho's chest, right where his hand had been. "Testing, maybe?" Or acknowledging the gesture. Then it made a sound, a deep rumbling that came from its chest, followed by a series of clicks and whistles. The other warriors responded with similar sounds. It was not threatening. More like surprise, maybe even approval. The old warrior turned and barked orders at the others. They lowered their weapons and stepped back, opening the circle. 2 younger warriors approached Daiho cautiously. They gestured for him to follow, using their upper arms to point toward the village. Daiho glanced at the old warrior, who made a gesture that seemed to mean agreement or permission. So he followed the 2 younger ones toward the massive trees and the platforms above. The rest of the warriors watched him go, still whispering to each other in their clicking language. As he walked, Daiho noticed something interesting. The young ones who had been playing in the trees were now hanging down from branches to get a better look at him. Their amber eyes were full of curiosity rather than fear. Good. If the children were curious instead of scared, maybe the adults would be more welcoming. The path led to a carved staircase that spiraled up one of the massive tree trunks. The steps were wide enough for the four-armed warriors, but a bit awkward for Daiho. He climbed carefully, very aware that falling from this height would kill him. The two warriors led him across a rope bridge that swayed with every step. Daiho tried not to look down at the 50-foot drop below. The warriors moved across it like they were walking on solid ground, their forearms giving them perfect balance. Daiho just tried not to fall off. They entered a large platform house built into the side of the tree. Inside, it was dim and cool. The walls were covered with more bones and what looked like trophies from hunts or battles. Weapons hung from hooks. Carved masks decorated the corners. This was the home of someone important. The old warrior was already there, sitting on a low bench made from woven vines and wood. It gestured for Daiho to sit on another bench across from it. The two younger warriors stood by the entrance watching. Daiho sat down carefully. The bench held his weight, which was good. He looked at the old warrior and waited. This was their home. Their customs. He would let them make the first move. The old warrior studied him for a long moment. Then it reached up and touched its own chest with one hand. Tekmar, it said slowly, the word coming out with clicks and rumbles that Daiho's human throat could never reproduce. But Daiho understood. A name. The old warrior was introducing itself. He touched his own chest and said clearly, Daiho. Tekmar repeated it, mangling the pronunciation slightly but making a good effort. Then it gestured around the room with two arms while the other two stayed relaxed. It was saying something, probably explaining what this place was or who it belonged to. Daiho nodded along, trying to pick up any clues from the gestures and tone. Communication was going to be slow and difficult, but it was possible. They were intelligent. They understood the concept of names and hospitality and tests of worthiness. He had passed their test. He had earned the right to stay, at least for now. But he still needed to figure out how to repair his distress beacon, how to signal for rescue, and how to survive long enough for help to arrive. Tekmar stood up and walked to the wall, taking down a carved wooden cup. It filled the cup with water from a clay pot and offered it to Daiho with one of its lower arms. Daiho took the cup carefully and drank. The water was cool and clean, tasting faintly of the strange, sweet-sharp smell that filled the jungle. He drank it all and handed the cup back with a bow of his head. Tekmar made a sound that might have been approval. Then it said something to the two guards at the entrance. They nodded and left quickly. Daiho was alone with the old warrior now. Tekmar sat back down and fixed those dark orange eyes on him. Then it made a gesture that was clear even without words. It pointed at Daiho's two arms, then at its own four. Then it made a questioning gesture. It was asking how Daiho had dodged the spears with only two arms, how a weak, handicapped creature had done what should have been impossible. Daiho smiled and tapped his head with one finger. Then he made a gesture like his brain was working very fast, spinning his finger in circles near his temple. It was a crude way to explain enhanced reflexes, but maybe Tekmar would understand the basic concept. Smart, fast thinking, quick reactions. Tekmar's eyes seemed to brighten slightly. It nodded slowly, making a sound that might have been understanding. Then it stood up and gestured for Daiho to follow again. They left the house and crossed another rope bridge to a different platform. This one was more open, like a training ground. Several warriors were practicing with spears and blades, their forearms moving in complex patterns that would have been beautiful if they were not so deadly. The practice stopped when Tekmar and Daiho arrived. The warriors turned to stare at the strange two-armed creature their leader had brought. Daiho could feel their eyes on him, judging, measuring, wondering if he was truly as capable as the story would claim. One warrior stepped forward. This one was younger than Tekmar but heavily built, with darker armor plates and scars across its chest. The amber eyes were bright and challenging. This was someone who fought for position, for status. And right now, Daiho was a threat to that status. The warrior said something to Tekmar in their clicking language. The tone was aggressive, demanding. Tekmar's response was sharp and final. But the warrior persisted. gesturing at Deho with all four arms. Deho did not need to understand the words to know what was happening. The warrior wanted to fight him. To prove the spear test was just luck. To show the village that the stranger was not really worthy of respect. Thecamar looked at Deho and made a questioning gesture. Was he willing to fight? Or would he back down? Deho looked at the challenging warrior. It was bigger than him, stronger, had four arms to his two, and was covered in natural armor that would stop most of his strikes. This was a bad idea. But backing down now would lose him everything he had just earned. He nodded to Thecamar. Yes, he would fight. The old warrior made an announcement to the gathered crowd. More warriors came quickly, climbing up from other platforms to watch. The young ones appeared in the trees around them, hanging upside down from branches to get a better view. Within minutes, at least 50 of them had gathered. The challenging warrior moved to the center of the training ground. It picked up 2 practice spears, one in each upper arm. The weapons were blunted but would still hurt badly if they connected. The warrior spun them in a pattern that showed incredible skill, all 4 arms working together in perfect coordination. Deho was offered a weapon. He chose a simple practice staff, about 6 feet long and made from the same dense wood as the spears. It felt good in his hands, balanced, familiar enough to the training weapons he had used in the military. Thecamar stood between them and made a series of gestures. Rules, probably. No killing. First blood or surrender. Something like that. Both Deho and the warrior nodded their understanding. Then Thecamar stepped back and gave the signal to begin. The warrior moved first, incredibly fast. It came at Deho with both spears stabbing forward in a scissor pattern. The lower arms were already moving to grab or block any counterattack, 4 limbs attacking and defending at the same time. It was overwhelming. Deho's enhanced reflexes saved him again. He saw the pattern of the attack before it fully developed. He stepped sideways at the last second, letting both spears pass by him. Then he swung his staff at the warrior's head, but the warrior was ready. One of its lower arms came up and blocked the staff easily. The other lower arm shot out and grabbed Deho's weapon, trying to rip it from his hands. The 2 spears were already repositioning for another attack. Deho let the staff go instead of fighting for it. The warrior stumbled slightly from the sudden lack of resistance. In that moment, Deho stepped in close inside the reach of the spears. He drove his elbow into the warrior's midsection, right where the armor plates separated. The warrior made a sound of pain and surprise. It dropped Deho's staff and swung with all 4 arms, trying to catch him in a grab that would end the fight. But Deho ducked under the arms and rolled away, scooping up his staff as he moved. The crowd made sounds of approval, or maybe surprise. Deho could not tell the difference yet. But they were engaged, watching closely. The warrior was angry now. It charged forward with the spears extended, using its 4 arms to create a wall of attacks that should have been impossible to avoid in the limited space of the platform. Deho could not go left or right, could not go back. The only way was through, so he went through. He ran straight at the warrior, staff held horizontal. At the last second, he slid under the spears like a baseball player stealing a base. His staff caught the warrior's legs and swept them out from under it. The warrior fell hard, landing on its back with a thud that shook the platform. Deho rolled to his feet and brought his staff down, stopping just an inch from the warrior's throat. The point was made. He had won. The crowd erupted in sounds, clicking and whistling and rumbling all mixed together. The young ones in the trees were practically bouncing with excitement. Even Thecamar seemed pleased, making a sound that might have been approval. Deho stepped back and offered his hand to help the warrior up. It was a human gesture, but he hoped the meaning would translate. No hard feelings. Just a test, just a fight. The warrior stared at his hand for a moment. Then it reached up with one of its lower arms and took it. Deho pulled, helping the larger creature to its feet. The warrior stood there, all 4 eyes looking at Deho with what might have been respect now instead of challenge. Then it did something unexpected. It took one of its practice spears and offered it to Deho with both upper arms. The gesture was formal, ceremonial. This was more than just returning a weapon. This was acknowledgement. Deho took the spear with both hands and bowed his head slightly. The warrior returned the gesture with a dip of its head and a hand over its chest. Then it stepped back and joined the crowd, which parted to let it through. Thecamar approached Deho and placed one of its large hands on his shoulder. The grip was firm but not painful. The old warrior said something in its language, and the crowd responded with a unified sound. Agreement, maybe, or acceptance. Then something else happened. A young female pushed through the crowd. She was smaller than the warriors, with lighter-colored armor plates that were more brown than green. Her amber eyes were bright with curiosity rather than challenge. She carried a bag made from woven plant fibers slung across her body with a strap. She approached Deho and Tekmar, making respectful gestures to the old warrior, before turning her full attention to Deho. She studied him closely, walking around him in a circle and making thoughtful sounds. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a piece of dried fruit, offering it to him. Deho took it carefully. The fruit was hard and wrinkled but smelled sweet. He took a small bite, ready to spit it out if it tasted wrong. But it was good. Very sweet, with a texture like a fig. He ate the rest while the young female watched with what seemed like satisfaction. Tekmar said something to her, and she responded with rapid clicking and whistling. They were having a conversation about him. Deho caught a few gestures that seemed to reference his two arms again, and the way he moved. The young female turned back to Deho and made a gesture to follow. She started walking toward another platform, looking back to make sure he was coming. Tekmar made an approving sound and gestured for him to go with her. Deho followed the young female across bridges and platforms, climbing higher into the trees. She moved with easy confidence, barely touching the rope handrails. Deho was more careful, still not used to the heights. She led him to a platform that looked different from the others. Instead of weapons and trophies, this one had strange objects scattered around. Pieces of metal, broken tools, things that looked like they had fallen from the sky, salvage, technology. The young female gestured around the space with pride. This was her domain, her workshop, and she was showing it to him for a reason. Deho walked forward slowly, looking at the objects. Some of it was clearly from crashed ships. He saw parts of hull plating, what might have been a power cell, pieces of navigation equipment, all of it old and damaged but potentially useful. He turned to the young female and touched his chest. Deho, he said. She mimicked the gesture and made a sound. Sylvine. Her name had a melodic quality to it with more whistling than clicking. Deho pointed at the salvage technology and then at himself. He made gestures trying to explain that he needed to repair something, that he understood these objects, that he could work with them. Sylvine's eyes brightened even more. She made excited sounds and gestured rapidly, pointing at different pieces of salvage and then at Deho. She understood, and she was offering to help. Deho felt hope for the first time since the crash. Maybe he could fix the distress beacon after all. Maybe he could signal for rescue. But it would take time, and a lot of work, and learning to communicate better with these people. He looked at Sylvine and nodded firmly. Yes, they would work together. She made a happy sound and immediately started pulling out pieces of salvage, showing them to him one by one. Deho examined each piece, trying to determine what it had been and whether it was still functional. This was going to be a long project, but it was a start, and right now a start was all he needed. 3 weeks passed in the village. Deho learned more about the Vorath people every day. That was what they called themselves, Vorath. The word meant something like strong tree or standing firm in their language. It fit them well. Sylvine became his main companion and translator. She was patient with his attempts to learn their clicking language, and she seemed to understand his gestures and simple drawings better than anyone else. She was what the Vorath called a keeper of fallen stars, someone who collected and studied things that fell from the sky. They did not understand the technology, but they knew it was important, sacred even. Together they worked on repairing the distress beacon. Deho had managed to salvage the core transmitter from his crashed ship on a return trip with a group of Vorath warriors. The trip had been dangerous. They encountered some of the large predators Deho had heard in his first nights, 6-legged cat-like things with armored heads and poison barbs on their tails. The Vorath called them night razors. The warriors had fought them off, but one Vorath had been badly injured. Deho had used his first aid kit and some improvised techniques to stabilize the wounded warrior until they got back to the village. The warrior survived. After that, more of the Vorath started treating Deho with respect instead of curiosity. He had helped one of their own. That mattered. Now Daeho was sitting in Sylvine's workshop trying to connect a power cell from an old escape pod to the transmitter core. The challenge was that the power cell used a different voltage than the transmitter expected. He needed to build a regulator from scratch using salvaged parts. It was like trying to fix a car using parts from 3 different models and a bicycle. Sylvine watched closely as he worked, handing him tools when he gestured for them. She had learned what some of them did, and she asked questions through gestures and simple words. She wanted to understand, to learn. Her people might not have developed spaceflight, but they were not primitive, just different. This part, Daeho said, pointing to a circuit board he was trying to modify, needs to reduce the power flow, like a river becoming a stream. He made gestures with his hand, showing water flowing and then narrowing. Sylvine clicked thoughtfully. She reached into her collection and pulled out a small component that Daeho recognized as a voltage regulator. It was damaged, but maybe he could salvage the resistant coils inside. Yes, Daeho said, taking it carefully. Yes, this might work. You are brilliant. Sylvine made a pleased sound, her armor plates shifting to a slightly lighter color. Daeho had learned that was how the Vorath showed emotion. Color changes in their natural armor. Darker when angry or afraid. Lighter when happy or calm. As he worked on carefully extracting the coils, a commotion started outside. Voices raised in alarm. The sound of many feet running across platforms and bridges. Daeho looked up sharply. That was not normal activity. Something was wrong. Sylvine rushed to the entrance of the workshop. She looked out and then turned back to Daeho, her armor darkening rapidly. She made urgent gestures. Danger, attack. Come now. Daeho grabbed his survival knife and followed her out. The scene below was chaos. Warriors were rushing to the edges of the village platforms, weapons ready. The young ones were being herded into the central houses by the females. And in the distance, Daeho could hear a sound like thunder rolling through the jungle, but it was not thunder. It was drums. War drums. Thecamar appeared, climbing up to their platform with impressive speed for someone his age. He barked orders at Sylvine, who nodded rapidly. Then the old warrior turned to Daeho and made a clear gesture. Stay here, stay safe. This is not your fight. But Daeho shook his head. He pointed at himself, then at the warriors below, then made a fighting gesture. He was staying. If the village was under attack, he would help defend it. These people had given him shelter and help. He owed them. Thecamar stared at him for a long moment. Then he made a sound that might have been approval or resignation. He handed Daeho a spear, a real one with a sharp bone tip, and gestured for him to follow. They climbed down to the main defensive platforms. Warriors were positioned at key points around the village perimeter, spears ready. Some had bows made from what looked like giant insect parts with arrows tipped in something that gleamed wet and dark. Poison, probably. The drums grew louder. Then Daeho saw them. Shapes moving through the jungle below. Not Vorath. Something different. Larger. With armor that looked like metal plates instead of natural shell. They carried weapons that were more advanced than the Vorath spears. Swords made from refined metal. Shields that reflected the sunlight. Who are they? Daeho asked, knowing Thecamar could not understand but needing to ask anyway. Thecamar made a sound that was clearly a curse. He pointed at the approaching army and made a gesture like breaking something. Enemies, old enemies. Bad blood between them. There were at least 40 of them. Maybe more behind the trees. They moved with discipline in organized ranks. This was not a raid. This was a proper military assault. The lead warrior of the attacking force stepped into a clearing where the Vorath could see him clearly. He was massive, at least 7 feet tall, with 4 arms like the Vorath, but different proportions. The armor was definitely metal, worked and shaped with skill. He carried a sword in each upper hand and had a shield strapped to one lower arm. He shouted something up at the village. A challenge or a demand? Daeho could not understand the words, but the tone was clear. Aggressive, commanding. This was someone used to being obeyed. Thecamar shouted back, his response equally aggressive. The conversation went back and forth several times. Negotiation, maybe, or ritual combat challenges. Daeho watched the body language of both sides, trying to understand the situation. Then the negotiation apparently failed. The enemy leader made a sharp gesture, and his warriors raised their weapons. The attack was coming. Here we go, Daeho muttered, gripping his spear tightly. The enemy charged forward with organized precision. They had ladders and climbing ropes. They knew how to assault a tree village. This was not their first attack. The Vorath opened fire with their bows. Arrows rained down on the attackers. Many hit, but the metal armor stopped most of them. A few attackers fell, the poison working fast. But the others kept coming. Deho watched the assault pattern and saw something the Vorath had not. The main attack was coming from the front, loud and obvious. But a smaller group was circling around to the west side, where fewer defenders were positioned. A flanking maneuver, basic military tactics. He grabbed Thekmar's arm and pointed urgently at the western platforms. Then he made gestures showing the enemy circling around. Sneak attack. Flanking. Thekmar's eyes widened. He barked orders at several warriors who immediately rushed to reinforce the western defenses. But it might be too late. The flanking group was already climbing. Deho made a decision. He ran across the bridges to the western platform, moving faster than was probably safe. He arrived just as the first enemy warrior pulled himself up over the edge. The warrior saw Deho and hesitated for just a second, surprised to see a two-armed creature. That second cost him. Deho thrust his spear forward, catching the warrior in the shoulder joint where the armor did not protect. The warrior screamed and fell backward, taking two others down with him, but more were coming. Three pulled themselves up at once, spreading out to attack from different angles. Deho backed up, spear ready. These were trained fighters. They knew how to work together. They attacked as a unit. One high, one low, one straight center, four arms giving them incredible reach and coordination. Deho's enhanced reflexes let him track all three at once, but he could not be in three places at the same time. He focused on the center attacker first, deflecting the sword strike and stepping in close where the enemy's longer weapons were less effective. He drove the butt of his spear into the warrior's midsection, then spun and used the momentum to sweep the legs of the low attacker. The high attacker's sword came down at his head. Deho dropped flat, and the blade embedded itself in the wooden platform. While the warrior was trying to pull it free, Deho kicked hard at its knee. The armor protected it, but the force still knocked the warrior off balance. More Vorath warriors arrived then, charging across the bridge with weapons raised. They crashed into the enemy climbers like a wave, driving them back. Deho stepped aside and let the Vorath do what they did best, fight with overwhelming ferocity. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The enemy eventually retreated, dragging their wounded with them. The Vorath cheered victory, raising their weapons and making triumphant sounds. Deho leaned against a tree trunk, breathing hard. He had a cut on his arm where one sword had gotten through. His shoulder was screaming from the crash injury that had never fully healed. But he was alive, and the village was safe. Thekmar found him there and placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. The old warrior looked at the bodies of the enemy warriors Deho had fought and made an approving sound. Then he said something that included Deho's name. Praise maybe, or thanks. Sylvine appeared, her armor still dark with worry. She saw the cut on Deho's arm and immediately pulled out a pouch from her bag. Inside was a paste made from crushed plants. She applied it to 2 more weeks passed. The days fell into a routine that Deho found surprisingly comfortable. Mornings were spent working on the beacon with Sylvine. Afternoons were for training with the warriors or helping around the village. Evenings were for eating together and slowly learning more of the Vorath language. Deho could now understand basic words and phrases. Food was a series of clicks that sounded like tak-tak. Danger was a low whistle followed by a rumble. Friend was Kriya, with the emphasis on the second part. He was learning, slowly but learning. The beacon was almost ready. Deho had managed to build a working power regulator using parts from 4 different salvaged devices. The transmitter core was functional, though its range would be limited. It would not reach human space directly, but if any human ships passed through this sector, even at the edge of their sensors, they would pick up the signal. The problem was the antenna. The original had been destroyed in the crash. Deho needed to build a new one, and it needed to be tall. Very tall. High enough to clear the forest canopy and send the signal into space without interference. Sylvine had an idea. She led him to the tallest tree in the village, the one the Vorath called the grandfather tree. It was ancient, rising at least 300 feet into the air. The top was bare of branches, having been struck by lightning at some point in the distant past. Perfect for an antenna. The challenge was getting the equipment up there and installing it. Deho was good at climbing now, but carrying delicate electronic components that high was risky. One slip and everything would be destroyed. Thekmar offered a solution. The Vorath had a pulley system they used for lifting heavy supplies. It was simple but effective. They could use it to raise the beacon components to the top, and Deho could follow separately to install everything. It took 3 days to get everything in place. Deho climbed to the top of the grandfather tree, his muscles burning from the effort. The view was incredible. He could see for miles in every direction. The jungle spread out like a green ocean. Mountains rose in the distance. The 2 suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, but he did not have time to admire the view. He worked quickly, mounting the antenna array and connecting it to the transmitter. The power cell would last maybe 2 weeks if he was lucky. After that, he would need to replace it. But 2 weeks of constant broadcasting should be enough. Should be. As the last sun dipped below the horizon, Deho made the final connection. The beacon hummed to life. He could not hear the radio signal it was broadcasting, but the indicator light glowed steady green. It was working. The message was simple. Distress call. Human pilot. Coordinates. Request rescue. Now he just had to wait. Deho climbed back down as carefully as he could in the growing darkness. By the time he reached the main platforms, the whole village was waiting. They had seen the light at the top of the grandfather tree. They knew something important had happened. Sylvine rushed to him, making questioning sounds. Was it done? Was it working? Deho nodded and made a gesture toward the sky. Then he tried to explain in broken Vorath that his people might come now, might find him. He gestured at himself leaving, flying away in a ship. Sylvine's armor darkened. The other Vorath made sad sounds. They understood. Deho would be leaving them, going back to his own people. The realization seemed to hit them all at once. Thecamar stepped forward and placed both upper hands on Deho's shoulders. The old warrior looked him in the eyes and said something long and complicated. Deho did not understand all the words, but he caught Kriya and his own name several times. Friend. Deho was a friend. Would always be a friend. Deho felt a tightness in his chest. These people had saved his life, taken him in, given him shelter and food and help. He owed them everything, and in a few days or weeks he would leave them behind. It felt wrong. That night Deho could not sleep. He lay in the small room the Vorath had given him, staring at the woven ceiling and thinking. His mission had been a routine scout run, chart new systems, look for resources, check for intelligent life, standard exploration work. But this was more than just a first contact situation. The Vorath were at war. He had learned more about it from watching and listening. The enemy warriors who had attacked the village were called the Krell. They were conquerors. They moved from world to world, enslaving or destroying any species they found. The Vorath had been fighting them for generations and they were losing. The Krell had better weapons, better organization, better technology. They had ships that could travel between stars. The Vorath only had their spears and their courage. It was not enough. Eventually the Krell would overwhelm them. It was just a matter of time, unless someone helped them. Deho sat up. An idea was forming, a dangerous idea, but maybe the right one. Humanity had laws about first contact, non-interference. Do not get involved in alien conflicts. Observe and report. Let the diplomats handle it. Good laws made to prevent disasters and exploitation, but those laws were made for situations where both sides were equally matched or where the conflict was not clear. This was different. This was genocide in slow motion. The Krell would wipe out the Vorath culture, enslave them, destroy everything they had built over thousands of years. Deho made his decision. When the rescue ship came, he would tell them everything, and he would make sure they understood that the Vorath needed help, real help, military help. Humanity could make a difference here. Should make a difference. He lay back down, feeling better. Sleep came easier now. The days passed slowly. Deho continued training with the warriors, teaching them everything he knew about tactics and strategy. He showed them how to set up defensive positions, how to use terrain to their advantage, how to coordinate attacks using signals instead of just charging forward. The warriors learned quickly. They were already skilled fighters. They just needed to think differently, to fight smarter instead of just harder. Some of the older warriors resisted. They believed in their traditional methods, but the younger ones saw the value in what Deho taught. He also spent time with Sylvine, learning more about Vorath history and culture. She showed him their art, which was primarily carved wood and woven patterns. The designs were mathematical and precise, based on natural patterns from the jungle, fractals and spirals, beautiful and complex. Sylvan told him stories through a mix of words and gestures, stories of ancient heroes, of great battles, of the time before the Krell came, when the Vorath lived in peace and explored their world freely. She made a sound that Daiho had learned meant sadness. She had never known that peace. She had been born into a world at war. Daiho promised her in his broken Vorath that he would try to help, that his people were strong, that they could fight the Krell together. Sylvain's armor lightened slightly. Hope. Maybe just a little, but it was there. On the 10th day after activating the beacon, something changed. Daiho was training with a group of young warriors when Sylvain came running across the bridges, moving faster than he had ever seen her move. Her armor was flickering between light and dark rapidly, excitement mixed with fear. She grabbed his arm and pointed at the sky. She made a sound that meant falling star, but with urgency. Something was coming down from space, something big. Daiho felt his heart start racing. It could be a rescue ship, or it could be something else. Something worse. He ran with Sylvain to the grandfather tree and climbed quickly to a high platform where he could see the sky clearly. There, in the distance, a streak of light descending through the atmosphere, but not falling like a meteor, descending in a controlled manner, a ship, and based on the angle and speed, it was landing, or at least trying to. The trajectory was wrong for a smooth landing. Whoever was flying that ship was having trouble. Daiho watched with experienced eyes, calculating where it would come down. East of the village, maybe 3 miles. In the jungle. The ship disappeared below the tree line. A few seconds later, he heard a distant crash. Not as bad as his had been, but definitely a crash landing. Someone was stranded now, just like he had been. Daiho climbed down quickly. Thekmar was already organizing warriors. The old leader knew that any ship landing near their territory was important. Could be friend or enemy. They needed to investigate. Daiho gestured that he should go with them. He knew ships. He could tell if it was human or Krell or something else entirely. Thekmar agreed with a nod. They moved through the jungle quickly, a group of 12 warriors plus Daiho. The Vorath moved through the trees like ghosts, barely making a sound. Daiho tried to keep up, using the skills he had learned over the past weeks. They reached the crash site within an hour. The ship was human. Daiho recognized the design immediately. A destroyer-class scout bigger than his ship had been, military, not civilian. The hull was scarred and blackened from a rough entry. One engine was completely destroyed, but the main hull seemed intact. The hatch was open. Someone had gotten out. Daiho approached carefully, the Vorath warriors spreading out around him in a defensive formation. He reached the hatch and looked inside. The cockpit was empty. Blood on one of the seats. Not a lot, but enough to be concerning. Someone was injured. He heard a sound behind him and turned. A woman stood there holding a pistol pointed at his chest. She was human. Korean like him. Maybe 30 Commander Hanul recovered quickly over the next 3 days. Sylvain treated her arm with the same plant paste she had used on Daiho, and the wound healed cleanly. Hanul spent most of her time either resting or working on repairing her ship's communication system. Daiho helped her salvage what they could from both crashed ships. Together they managed to build a stronger transmitter than his simple distress beacon. This one could reach human space directly. Send detailed messages. Request specific assistance. What should we tell them? Hanul asked as they worked on the final connections. Daiho thought carefully. The truth. We discovered an intelligent species engaged in a defensive war against an aggressive expansionist force. First contact protocols apply, but so do emergency intervention guidelines. The Vorath face extinction without outside help. We recommend immediate diplomatic contact and military assessment of the Krell threat. Hanul nodded slowly. That is a strong recommendation. Command might not approve intervention. Then we make them approve it. We have evidence. We have testimony. We have an obligation. The galaxy is a dangerous place, Hanul. Humanity needs friends out here. The Vorath could be those friends. She looked at him with something like respect. You really have gone native, have not you? I have learned to see people instead of just aliens. There is a difference. They activated the transmitter that evening. The message was sent on all military channels with maximum priority. Now they had to wait for a response. In normal conditions, it would take 2 days for the signal to reach the nearest human outpost. Another day for them to organize a response. 3 more days for a ship to reach this location. A week total. Maybe less if they moved fast. The Vorath did not fully understand what was happening, but they knew something important was in motion. Tekkamar asked questions through gestures and simple words. Deho did his best to explain. His people were coming, many of them, with big ships to talk, to help maybe, to fight the Krell together. The old warrior's eyes glowed brighter. He made sounds to the gathered Vorath, translating what Deho had said. The response was mixed. Some warriors looked excited. Others looked worried. Change was coming, and change was always uncertain. Sylvine pulled Deho aside later that evening. Her armor was flickering with concern. She made a complex gesture and spoke carefully in Vorath, using words she knew he would understand. Deho's people come. Is good. But Deho leave too? Go to Sky and not return? Deho felt that tightness in his chest again. He could not lie to her. Maybe I have duties. Responsibilities to my people. But I will not forget Vorath. I promise. I will make humans understand. Make them help. Sylvine's armor darkened further. She reached out with one of her lower hands and touched his arm gently. Kriya, she said softly. Friend. Then she added something in Vorath that was too complex for him to fully understand. But he caught the meaning. She would miss him. I will miss you too, he said quietly. The days crawled by with painful slowness. Deho and Hanul took turns monitoring the transmitter. On the 4th day, they got a response. A military frigate was inbound. Arrival in approximately 40 hours. Prepare for extraction and full debrief extraction. That meant they were leaving. Going home. Deho should have felt relieved. Excited even, but mostly he felt conflicted. This place had become home in a strange way. These people had become family. The next day, everything changed. War drums echoed through the jungle. The Krell were attacking again. But this time it was different. This was not a raid. This was an army. Deho climbed to a high platform and looked out at the jungle. His blood ran cold. There were hundreds of them. Maybe more. The Krell had brought their full force, including siege equipment. Tall wooden towers on wheels. Battering rams. This was not meant to be a skirmish. This was meant to be the end. The Krell were going to destroy the village completely. Tekkamar was already organizing the defense, but Deho could see the fear in the eyes of the warriors. They had never faced an assault this size. They could not win. Not alone. Deho ran to find Hanul. She was at the transmitter, and her face told him she had already figured it out. The frigate is still 30 hours out, she said. We do not have 30 hours. Then we fight. Use everything I taught them. Every tactic, every strategy. Hold them off as long as we can. Against those numbers, Deho, we need to evacuate. Get the Vorath civilians to safety. Where? The jungle is full of Krell. The mountains are weeks away. There is nowhere to run. They stared at each other, both knowing the truth. If they stayed, they would probably die. But if they ran, the Vorath civilians who could not fight would definitely die. Elders, children, the injured. They could not move fast enough to escape. Deho made his decision. I am staying. I am helping them defend this place. You get to a safe position and guide the frigate in when it arrives. If we survive that long, they can evacuate everyone. If we do not... He did not finish the sentence. Hanul grabbed his arm. I am not leaving you to die here alone. You are not. I have got 300 Vorath warriors with me, and I've got a few tricks the Krell have not seen yet. She studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded. All right, but I am setting up a defensive position on the perimeter. Military support. If you are going to do something crazy, you will have covering fire. Deal. They split up. Hanul gathered what weapons and equipment they had salvaged. Deho went to find Tekkamar and the War Council. The next hour was a blur of preparation. Deho used everything he knew about defensive tactics. He positioned warriors in layered formations, set up choke points on the bridges, created fallback positions in case the outer defenses failed. He showed them how to use fire as a weapon, making torches and oil bombs from plant resins. The Vorath warriors listened intently. They trusted him now, trusted his knowledge. They would follow his plans because he had earned their respect through actions, not just words. Sylvine appeared with a group of non-combatants. They carried supplies, food, water, medicine, ammunition for the bows. She had organized the civilians into support roles. Everyone was contributing what they could. She approached Deho and handed him something. It was a carved piece of wood on a leather cord. A Vorath symbol. Thekmar wore one. The champion warriors wore them. It meant something important: brotherhood, family, belonging. "You are Vorath now," she said carefully in broken words. "You fight with us. You are one of us." Deho took the carved symbol and put it around his neck. It rested against his chest, right over his heart. "I am honored." Then the Krell attacked. It started with arrows, hundreds of them arcing through the air. The Vorath raised shields made from thick wood and chitin. Most of the arrows bounced off or stuck without penetrating, but some found gaps. Warriors fell, then came the siege towers. They rolled forward on crude wheels, pushed by dozens of Krell warriors. When they reached the trees, ladders extended from the tops, trying to reach the lower platforms. Deho had prepared for this. He gave the signal. Vorath warriors pushed over clay pots filled with burning oil. The liquid fire poured down onto the siege towers and the Krell below. Screams erupted as the fire spread. 2 towers collapsed immediately, engulfed in flames. But more towers kept coming. The Krell were relentless. They reached the trees and warriors began climbing. The real fighting started. Deho fought alongside Thekmar and the other warriors. His enhanced reflexes kept him alive as Krell swords flashed around him. He used his spear, his knife, and anything else he could grab. The platform was slick with blood. Both Vorath and Krell fell, but the Vorath were holding. Barely, but holding. Every choke point Deho had set up was working. Every tactic was buying them time. Time for the frigate to arrive. Time for help to come. Hanul's position was giving covering fire from the edge of the village. She had salvaged a plasma rifle from her ship, and every shot counted. Krell warriors fell to precise bursts of superheated energy, but even she could not be everywhere at once. Hours passed. The battle raged on. Deho lost track of time. Lost track of how many enemies he had fought. His arms ached. His shoulder was bleeding again. But he kept fighting because the Vorath were still fighting, and he would not let them down. Then he heard it. A sound that did not belong to the jungle. A sound like thunder mixed with wind. He looked up and saw it. A human frigate dropping through the atmosphere with engines blazing. The Krell heard it too. They looked up in fear and confusion. What was this metal bird from the sky? The frigate did not land. It hovered above the battlefield and its weapons ports opened. The captain's voice boomed across the jungle in Korean, amplified by external speakers. "Human personnel, mark your position. All other combatants, cease hostilities immediately or face defensive action." Deho grabbed a flare from his emergency kit and lit it, waving it over his head. Red smoke poured into the air. Hanul did the same from her position. The frigate adjusted its position, and Deho could see weapons tracking the Krell forces below. The Krell leader, recognizing a superior force when he saw one, made a strategic decision. He called for retreat. The drums changed their rhythm. The Krell warriors began pulling back, dragging their wounded and leaving their dead. Within minutes, the jungle was empty except for the aftermath. Smoke rising from burning siege towers,